Okay, so we can see, even with my cat-handed brief, and you really go find clever people who are not me, just from the way that we have understood the Roman Empire and how it ended, that the stories that we tell ourselves, and these are very much the stories that have formed the basis of our understanding of ourselves as nations within the world, they have to change every so often. And we have a history that's been formed, you know, in a period where we have been, well, we haven't had to consider the context in which we exist in the way that we have to now. And we live not only in an age because of technology changing the way that we communicate, that in itself demands that we change the way that we look at the world. We are also exiting a period where our dominance of the world has ended and economic power has shifted east and our significance has been brought into question. So I promised this would be about Europe, and you're going, I don't even understand what the fuck she's going on about. Why is she talking about this in relation to Europe? So I wanted to talk about the emergence of the relationship that we now call Europe, which is a system where we have a supranational institution binding lots and lots of national entities. And that's the EU 27, not 28 anymore. Anyway. So, in the western half of the Roman Empire, these kingdoms that emerged, these barbarian kingdoms who were not barbarians at all, they still want to be Rome. They aspire to be Rome. They remember Rome as, you know, they see it as a time of greatness. And I think there's a bit of muddiness about how the transfers of power happened, and I think it all depends on who was reading and writing and who was recording. But what we do know is where the birth of kind of national and supranational relations that we now have with Europe was re-established in Europe, and that was very much about the relationship of Christianity and the barbarian kingdoms. And one of the very, very interesting transfers of power that happens early on in Europe, I think, tells you a great deal about what probably happened with the end of the Roman Empire. And that is the transfer of power between a dynasty called the Merovingians, who were like the first Frankish dynasty to emerge after the Roman Empire was acknowledged as over, and the transition of power to a new dynasty called the Carolingians. And the second Carolingian king was somebody who you might have heard of, but actually I don't think we teach this in England as well as we should, and that's Charlemagne. And Charlemagne was the second king in a Carolingian dynasty, which he eventually, his territories covered, I think, quite most of what we consider now France, most of what we consider Germany, a good chunk, like a very improbable bunch of territories that we would consider to be Italy. And this was all one kingdom under this man, Charlemagne. But what's terribly interesting about Charlemagne is actually the transfer of power between the dynasty that came before and his family. And Charlemagne's family were the Carolingians, and they had initially not been a rival family to the Merovingians, but they had emerged within the Merovingian dynasty, who were the first dynasty kind of out of the blocks after Rome dies. And they are called mayors of the palace, and their power grows by being like the right-hand men, the hands of the king. They're like the hands of the king within this system. So the mayors of the palace, over time, they are controlling the army, and they are controlling the economy, and they're running the palace, and there is nothing that's going on without them, and they are increasing their power, and they're increasing their power. And without almost knowing it, the Merovingian dynasty is getting very, very, very weak, because this power structure is emerging within their house that's weakening them, because they're dependent on it and they're doing everything for them. Now, this isn't actually altogether straightforward in itself, because it's not just that the Carolingians usurped the Merovingians. So Charlemagne's father, he's the first Carolingian king, And Charlemagne goes on to be one of the greatest leaders in Europe and is still remembered to this day as, you know, the father of Europe. But the power transfer is not straightforward. So it's not even just that Charlemagne's family come up as these mayors of the palace, these stewards, these administrators, these controllers of the different arms of kind of the Merovingian apparatus. They tried to take over, and they tried to say, I think it's Charlemagne's grandfather or his father, the first time that the Carolingians say, actually, we're going to take over, and we are going to replace the Merovingians. Because when they do this, they try this the first time, the people who are governed by this system say, no, you're fucking not. You're getting back in your box. You're the mayors of the palace. They're the royal family, and we'll have a bit of a distinction here. So even we talk about, if you listen to Tony Benn, he'll tell you that aristocracy just happened because a bunch of people nicked the land. This is nowhere near this straightforward. So within this power transfer, which is the first major power transfer since the end of the Roman Empire, the power comes up through the Merovingian house in much the same way as kind of the power of the barbarian kingdoms has come up through Rome and usurps it. But when it initially tries to usurp this power, the people say, no, we're not having this. You'll get back in your fucking box. And one of the reasons that Charlemagne was kind of pushed to try to be so driven was that he had to really establish legitimacy for the Carolingian dynasty that he is only the second monarch for. Because his legitimacy comes from people. And if people won't give it, you haven't got it, and you can't impose it. And so Charlemagne is like really important on a whole million levels. Like, you really do have to understand Charlemagne to even understand the foundations of Europe. But Charlemagne kind of binds together this very improbable, vast tract of Europe. And he does so with a principle that's still at the core of the EU today, which is that the respect for local laws and local systems takes primacy over the overarching system that's imposed by him. And Charlemagne is very much aspiring to fill the space that Rome has left. And the Catholic Church are also trying to do this. So they've inherited, you know, they now have bishops, the way that the Roman religion had bishops. And much of the pageantry of the Roman kind of religion has been incorporated and reshaped into Christianity so that it's familiar. Do you know what I mean? This is actually coming up. But, you know, the people who are, like, defending this new Christian church from Rome, they are under siege all the time. And they need a bit of brute strength. And what you have with Charlemagne is he is the first king. He is actually crowned by the Pope. And the point at which the crown is put on Charlemagne's head is incredibly important, because it's this king saying, my legitimacy comes from this overarching binding structure. And the Catholic Church, they get a bit of muscle because Charlemagne's quite handy with the old fighting, and he'll protect them, and it's a bit of a protection racket. And this is like the formation of the Holy Roman Empire, which was not holy and was not Roman, but it was an empire for a bit. But actually Charlemagne was really, really shit at dynastic politics, and he liked spending time with his daughters, and he didn't want to marry them off. Do you know what I mean? And there's actually problems that were embedded within the time of Charlemagne that was still playing out in the Wars of Succession a long time later. But that's the birth of the relationship, the Europe that we kind of are beginning to see. That's the absolute seeds of it. Now, in terms of our relationship, England, the UK, whatever we want to describe, we were nowhere near. We weren't England then, we weren't the UK, we had not forged our national identity or become anywhere near it at this point. So I'll use terms interchangeably and understand completely that they're wrong. What I want to talk about in the next video is our relationship to Rome, and then to Europe, and now to the EU. I think, because it's always kind of been the same. Our relationship with Rome was very much like our relationship with Europe in the time of Charlemagne, and very much like our relationship with Europe now. And in a lot of ways, Brexit is not even fucking remotely new at all. In fact, it just is a replaying of an endless cycle that we've been having with Europe for the last couple of thousand years.